Okay guys, one step I forgot to show you was checking piston ring end gap. Put that in there. Press that in, your rings in square to the piston, just using an old piston. And then put your feeler gauge in there, check the gap, and then you've got in the book here, piston ring application chart, shows you the minimum and maximum gaps based on your overbore size, and we are good to go. So go through your stack of rings and check them. The rings we buy come from these guys, and oh, that's the bearing box. Where's my ring box? It's somewhere around here. Anyway, they come sized for the overbore, so they pre-set them. So just a quick check to make sure you got the right set is the way to go. And that way, oh, and then well, hold on, I'll show you the other step. Okay, and then the other step to check is the gap on the top, the clearance between the lands on the piston. And if it's overworn, then you need to replace the piston. But I've never had that issue with a new set of pistons and rings. So and I don't believe in putting new rings on old pistons, because usually the piston is egg shaped because it wears on the thrust faces and not on the sides. So now you're trying to put a round ring into an oval hole, and it's difficult to get any longevity out of it. But there you go. Okay, so we're putting the pistons in, and when we put the pistons in, I've got this one part way in already. I'll show you how I use my ring compressor. Okay, ring compressor's in place. It's compressing the piston rings. Orient your piston in the right direction. Okay, and then you want to make sure when you look down the bore that the crankshaft is out of the way of the connecting rod bolts, or you can score the bearing surface down there. You can cover the ends of the bolts with some rubber hose, and that'll protect it, or you can rotate the crankshaft to the position where the crank at that point is like this, and it's way down in its stroke, and so you miss. That's the way we've got this one set. So you just crank this little device down, it compresses the rings, and then using something soft, rubber mallet, just tap it in. Bingo. Okay, so we'll go down the line and do all those. Okay, keep your rod caps to the correct piston. Okay, so what I like to do at this point in the game is one piston at a time, get it in, get the bearings put on, same as doing the mains, and I'll plastic gauge them just to make sure they're right. So we'll install the new Cleveite bearing in here. Has a little indexing tab, and go through the process down the line and get them all in right. Some guys will put all the pistons in first and then they'll flip it over and do all the bearings, but I prefer to do one at a time so I don't have loose rod ends flopping around and accidentally score a bearing surface on the crank. So I'll get after that task. Okay, she's flipped over. There's my connecting rod and my crankshaft journal. And so I clean the back side real well and clean that seat real well, and then just install. Okay, so the bearing's in place, and then if you're not going to plastic gauge, you use some of this. But if you're going to plastic gauge, then you need to just have the very lightest film of oil on it. Clean the journal off and torque it all together and measure it. So I'm going to plastic gauge and just make sure everything was machined correct. And it's worth the extra step. This is not a time to rush and be lazy. Makes a big difference should you have a problem down the road and you think it was a machining problem. Do it now so that the machinist can correct it before things are actually run. So let's plastic gauge. Okay, my plastic gauge strip is in place. You do not want it by the oil hole. Offset it a little ways. Now we got the rod cap set, and if you look at the orientation, you can see how that thing goes on. There's an offset to the bolt holes, so match that up the same. Okay, so we just compare to the chart on here to the squished wax piece, and we come up with the 0.0015, which in the book 0.001 to 0.0019, so right in the middle. So perfect. Okay, so we'll go down the line. Okay, well, next step, I'll clean that off. I'll push the piston down away from the crank a little bit. I'll lube it up with some build grease. I'll clean this off the bearing, and I'll lube it up with build grease, put it back together, and torque it. Okay, so number one is installed. I don't have the pal nuts to go on. I gotta go get a set of those. I forgot about those. A lot of people don't run them. I'm kind of old school. I still like to run them, if anything, just for the completeness of the restoration, even though this one's not a true restoration. But yeah, so she all turns nice and smooth. When you look at the stroke, you need to make sure your offsets are by the book. The book explains it. So just make sure you got that going right. the bearing shells. Let's see, got some old ones over here. The bearing shells are made with double oil holes. It only uses one of them. Okay, and so you don't have to worry about aligning them too much. Just getting the tab into the lock space is what's important. And make sure you got it torqued right, and you should be good to go. So now we'll plastic gauge and double check all the way down the line. And so I'll crank it around and get the journal for number 2 down out of the way, so when I shove the piston and rod in, it doesn't hit, the bolts don't hit the crank journal. And then I pull that up by hand, keeping it aligned as I pull it up and set it. That's the trick. Okay, so now all the pistons are in. Okay, and double checking orientation is correct, and when you roll it over, check the orientation of the oil squirt holes. But now is a good time to mark top dead center. So there's a stripe for top dead center for installing the flywheel. And up front here on the crank, top dead center, and to highlight the mark for the timing, because that'll jive with the timing gear mark according to the book. And yeah, so one thing I didn't tell you guys is, as I lube this up, putting the pistons in, I put a film of light oil in everything, so to lube it all up, and that should do the trick. So that is piston installation. Now the one thing I'm waiting on is to see if we can come up with some pal nuts today to add to the connecting rod bolts. We'll see what happens there. But that's it for today, I guess. So take care. Okay, where we left off, we had all the rods, pistons installed, and you can see now things are kind of dripping with oil. There's builder's grease in there, but I also do a little light oil squirt around everything, just 30 weight oil, so just to help get things lubed at the start. And we're still waiting for the pal nuts, but while we're waiting on that, we can drop the lifters in. So we're going to reuse the old lifters. They're right here, and so I'll just hand clean each one up, and then I've already got them numbered. And so long as this surface is smooth and true, you're pretty good to go. And if the body is not real scored and they fit and they ride reasonably tight, you're good. So I put a little builder's grease on these, drop them in. Now if your adjustment nuts here rattle loose a lot, you can replace these at this time. And then if you've got an even wear, that's a pretty nice wear surface there. So yeah, very reusable. These last an amazing long time. So I'll clean that up, lube it up, and drop it in. Okay, there's number one dropped in. So one error one error that's easy to make is putting the camshaft in before you put those in. So don't make that mistake. And yeah, valves can be added later. So I'll go down the line, bing, 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 put them all in. Okay, all the tappets are in, and they got a little blob of build grease. The bearing surfaces are all lubed up. And we have a brand new camshaft in this kit. And one of the things I wanted to show you, why you always clean. Oh, let's see if we can make that work here. Can you see the crap inside there in the oil hole? Kind of difficult to see, but yeah, let's see here. Yeah, there we go. A lot of metal filings from the manufacturing of the cam. So rifle brush, scrub it out, trust nothing. These are good quality parts, but yeah, they're not doing the cleaning process for you. That's your choice. Okay, so we cleaned the cam. So we cleaned the cam up, and as you can see, we lubed all the lobes with builder's grease and all the bearings, and just very carefully slid it in. You want to be real careful that you don't damage this bearing surface. That middle one is steel on steel, and the back one is steel on steel. So be very careful not to score those, because it can be done. You can have a bearing made for that, but it is extremely expensive. So do not goof that up. It's pretty robust, pretty tough. So cam is in, and I think that'll do it for the day. Take care.